Well, as I said, I'm so happy to be here with all of you at this moment in our life together when I start my partnership of ministry with all of you. And it's worth thinking about this morning with a whole bunch of things really to remember and think about today, about who we are, our identity, and also where we're going and how people see us as well. And one of my favorite things to do sometimes is to think about if I needed to leave home or building quickly, what besides people and any pets would I grab in a moment of disaster? And I've been packing up for a while now all my things at Church of the Messiah. But I brought in today the thing that I would grab if there was no dogs or people around to save, and that is something that I think speaks about our identity. Before I show it to you, I'll just give you a little background, and that is it's an advertisement that the Episcopal Church advertising campaign launched in 1977. And it was given to me by a great friend long before I was thinking of going into the priesthood. So I'll show it to you now in thinking about identity. And it's going to go up here. In the church started by a man who had 6 wives, forgiveness goes without saying. Henry VIII. I met the man who designed that at a church conference several years later, and I said, you know, that was the most brilliant ad I've ever seen. And he said, oh, we had to pull it right away. And I said, why? And he said, Henry VIII is no poster boy for the Episcopal Church. So sociopaths aside, it's about identity. And it's about asking questions such as who are we and where are we going? This is a day that we are asking that question of ourselves in many, many different ways in different contexts. First of all, as a nation, we're commemorating the 4th of July, our independence, our birth as a nation. And it's a time to ask ourselves, how are we doing? Are we fulfilling the promise of what Benjamin Franklin called this great experiment? Have we done enough, and where are we going? Paul Monette, an author and poet, said this wonderful phrase, which is, he said, that we are the only country whose national anthem ends with a question. And that question, of course, is, oh, say, does that star-spangled banner still wave o'er the land of the free and home of the brave? And Paul posed it as saying, it's a time always to ask ourselves, are we true to our founding? And are we going in a direction that honors and even broadens our understanding of what it means to be an American? But in terms of our own parish, we are also in the context of a lot that's causing us to question. This has been a time of many losses and concern. And the questions that those situations, those events raise for us are important to ask and important to sit with without necessarily having an answer. For me, the answer remains that we gather in the presence of each other to express our love, which, frankly, you here at St. Peter's do so well. But of course, the other question must be, if we were honest, who is this Richard McKeon and what kind of priest is he going to be here at St. Peter's? And first of all, let me say that I do believe that we should always be like Ed Koch, the former mayor of New York, who would go out on the sidewalk and say, how am I doing? Well, one way of saying what you can expect is to talk a little bit about who I am and the promises I can make you as a congregation on this, my first Sunday with all of you. And that is to say, first of all, I have some very good news. And that is, after 39 years of parish ministry, I do not, like someone just out of seminary, think I have to change you. You are great the way you are. Change is not an easy thing, and it's especially not easy at the beginning of a ministry. Barbara Brown Taylor describes a wonderful moment in her ministry and parish ministry in her book, Leaving Church, which gives you an idea how her life went in the parish. But she said that in her small church in Georgia, the new priest came in and took it into his head that he didn't like the pulpit. So he told the senior warden, disassemble the pulpit, get rid of it. I don't want to see it anymore. I'm going to preach from the floor. So the senior warden took the pulpit down and stored it in his barn. And the day after that priest left, the pulpit was back in the church. Jim, take note. So I will not be making great changes. I look forward to a mutuality and a partnership with all of you in our ministry together. And one way of saying what you can expect is to tell you who is important to me. Who do I form my ministry based on their example? And of course, part of that is family, my grandparents and parents, who were so important in instilling in me a faith that has continued. But also, on a grander scale, people who I consider heroes. So I'll tell you who my two heroes are, and that will tell you a lot about me and what to expect. First, Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt, to me, is extraordinary, and from a very early age, I felt that way. She remains in my life and in my heart, in my vision of what it means to be a priest, someone who asks the question always, what can I do? What can I do to make the world better, to help people who are suffering? There's a great story about Eleanor Roosevelt. It's actually in a footnote. One of Eleanor Roosevelt's great qualities, unlike my own, is that she never banged her own drum. She remained very quiet about the things that she did. And there's a great story in a book, that, as I say, is in a footnote of the book, that tells the story of Eleanor Roosevelt in 1940, when France falls to the Nazis. Many people are trapped in France who had fled other parts of Europe thinking they were safe. And Eleanor Roosevelt became aware of that, and she sent a young man to Paris to evaluate what the situation was and how many people were trapped. And she gave him $10,000 to go to do as much as he could. And the story goes that when he arrived there, he realized what a catastrophe it was and what a humanitarian crisis it was. So he telegraphed Eleanor Roosevelt and said, Mrs. Roosevelt, many more people than we thought, trapped, lives at risk. It'll take much more money and extra legal methods to get them out. And all she cabled back was, how much? And that drive to action has formed me in my priesthood and remains so today. And the other hero is George Herbert, an Anglican priest who is also a poet, who was extraordinary. He was one of the great poets of the 17th century, but his real passion was doing parish ministry. All he wanted was to be a parish priest, and that is completely true for me. George Herbert believed that in the pastoral duties of a parish priest, we all find meaning and relationship that ultimately reflects our relationship with God. I was really set on my way to priesthood early on. I remember, and I've often teased my mother, that when it came time for me to go to kindergarten, as you know, a traumatic moment if you haven't been to preschool, when you're left by your parents in a room full of strangers without the benefit of alcoholic beverage. And I went in, and of course my lip was trembling and I was a little shaky. And my mother looked around the room and she saw a little girl at a table who was crying. And she leaned over and whispered to me, "Do you see that little girl over there? She needs you to help her." And I always said to Mom, "Why didn't you just give me a collar at that point?" Because you set my life on this path of ministry and comfort. So what can I promise you? I can promise you as your priest to be with you. I'll be with you in moments of joy and in hard moments too. And because this is a mutual journey, I know you'll be with me in those moments as well. I can promise to be with you in baptizing your children and your grandchildren, marrying you, your children, hopefully your grandchildren. And I'll also be with you at the loss of people that you love. I'll be with you when you're sick, when you're happy, when you're sad. Together, we'll have a ministry here in this place built on who you are, which is a loving, wonderful congregation. We'll forge a relationship that'll be much like marriage. I can't help but think of Jane Austen and those wonderful moments in relationship when friendship and love come together. And there's no greater relationship for her or for any of us. And I think being a great parish priest with a congregation as wonderful as St. Peter's is very much like a marriage. We'll have great times together, and you'll also realize the things about me that may annoy you to no end. If you expect me to drive a clean car that's neat, you're going to be very disappointed. But we will, in our relationship, build a trust and respect and love for each other that will be profound. And that I hope points us to the love that God has for us. I can't promise I'll do it perfectly, but I'll try my best. And together, we'll proclaim God's presence here in this community and to a broken world. We'll proclaim God's presence in joy and in sadness, in moments of triumph and in weakness, but most of all, in the great gift of love that I pray we'll share, treasure, and hold in our hearts. And I couldn't be happier than to be your priest. Amen.